Deep in the heart of rural Ghana, where the red earth meets endless stretches of ancient baobab trees, stands a Kojua Memorial Boarding School for girls. From the outside, it looks like any other colonial-era institution. Whitewashed walls, iron gates that creak in the harmattan wind, a bell tower that chimes every hour on the hour. But there's something different about this place. Something that makes the local villagers cross themselves when they pass by. Something that makes taxi drivers refuse to take passengers there after sunset. You see, at a Kojua memorial, no girl is allowed to leave the premises. Not for holidays. Not for family emergencies. Not even for funerals. Once you enter those iron gates, you stay until you complete your education. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. And today, we're going to find out why. Our story begins with 15-year-old Ama Darko, whose mother had just enrolled her despite the girl's desperate pleas. Ama pressed her face against the car window as they approached the school, watching the familiar landscape of her hometown fade into unfamiliar territory. The driver, an elderly man with worry lines etched deep into his forehead, kept glancing at her through the rear-view mirror. "Are you sure about this place, madam?" he asked her mother for the third time. The stories people tell. Ama's mother, a stern woman dressed in her finest Kent cloth, cut him off with a sharp look. "Stories are for children," she said firmly. "My daughter needs discipline, and this school provides the best education in the region." But even as she spoke these words, her voice trembled slightly. Even she had heard the whispers. The school had been founded in 1952 by a British missionary named Margaret Okojua Thompson, who had married a local chief and taken his name. She had dedicated her life to educating African girls when such opportunities were rare. The school had an impeccable reputation for academic excellence. Girls who graduated from Okojua Memorial went on to become doctors, lawyers, politicians. They changed the world. But they also carried something else with them, a look in their eyes that spoke of secrets too heavy for words. As their car pulled up to the main gate, Ama noticed something strange. There were no other parents dropping off their children. No tearful goodbyes. No last-minute hugs. Just silence. The gatekeeper, a woman so old her skin seemed to fold in on itself, emerged from a small hut beside the entrance. She moved with surprising speed for someone her age, her bare feet making no sound on the gravel. "Another one," she said, looking directly at Ama. Not to her mother, not to the driver, directly at Ama, as if she could see something the others couldn't. The old woman's eyes were clouded with cataracts, but somehow, Ama felt like those milky pupils were looking straight through to her soul. "Come, child," the gatekeeper said, her voice like dried leaves rustling in the wind. "Your room is ready." Ama's mother handed over the enrollment papers and a small suitcase. The goodbye was brief. Too brief. Almost like her mother was afraid to linger. As the car disappeared down the dusty road, Ama found herself alone with the gatekeeper. "What's your name, grandmother?" Ama asked, using the respectful term for an elder. The old woman smiled, revealing teeth stained red from years of chewing cola nuts. "I am Nana Ya," she said. "I have been keeping this gate for more years than you have been alive, and I will continue keeping it long after you graduate." There was something final about the way she said that last word, graduate, as if it meant more than just finishing school. Nana Ya led Ama through courtyards where other girls sat in perfect circles, their heads bent over textbooks. They all wore identical uniforms. White blouses, blue pleated skirts, black shoes so polished they reflected the afternoon sun. But what struck Ama most was their silence. In her previous school, break time meant laughter, gossip, games. Here, the only sounds were the turning of pages and the scratching of pencils on paper. "Why is it so quiet?" Ama whispered. Nana Ya paused in her walking. "Silence helps one listen," she said cryptically. and listening helps one learn what must be learned. They approached a 3-story building that housed the dormitories. The architecture was typical colonial style, with wide verandas and louvered windows designed to catch any hint of breeze. But something felt off about the proportions. The windows were smaller than they should be. The doors were thicker, and there were no handles on the inside. Amma's room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long hallway lined with identical doors. Her roommate was a girl named Efua, who had been at the school for 2 years. Efua was beautiful in that understated way that comes from good breeding and careful grooming. Her skin was the color of rich cocoa, and her hair was always perfectly braided. But her eyes held a sadness that seemed too deep for someone so young. "Welcome to a Kojua memorial," Efua said as Amma unpacked her few belongings. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like someone going through the motions of a conversation they'd had many times before. "How long have you been here?" Amma asked, trying to make conversation. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days, Efua replied without hesitation. The precision of her answer sent a chill down Amma's spine. Do you like it here?" Efua was quiet for a long moment, folding and refolding the same piece of clothing. "Like is not the right word," she finally said. "This place changes you, makes you into who you're supposed to become, whether you want to or not." That evening, Amma attended her first dinner in the Great Hall. The room was magnificent, with high ceilings supported by carved wooden beams and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns on the floor. Long tables were arranged in perfect rows, each seating exactly 12 girls. The food was simple but nourishing: rice and stew, plantains, fresh fruit, but nobody spoke during the meal. The only sounds were the clinking of spoons against bowls and the occasional clearing of a throat. At the head table sat the teachers and administrators. They were all women, all dressed in identical dark blue dresses that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. But it was the woman at the center of the table who commanded attention. She was tall and elegant, with skin so dark it seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her hair was wrapped in an elaborate head wrap made from the finest Adinkra cloth. Gold jewelry adorned her neck and wrists, each piece carved with symbols that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. This was Headmistress Akasoma Osei, the great niece of the school's founder. She had been running a Kojua memorial for over 30 years, and in all that time, she had never once left the grounds. After dinner, the girls filed silently back to their dormitories. As Amma prepared for bed, she noticed something strange about her room. There were no mirrors, not even a small one for grooming. When she asked Efua about this, her roommate's response was chilling. "Mirrors show you who you are," Efua said quietly. "But this place is about becoming who you need to be. Sometimes it's better not to see the process." That night, Amma lay awake listening to the sounds of the school settling into sleep. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear singing. Not the kind of joyful singing she was used to from church or celebrations. This was different, haunting, ancient. The melody seemed to seep through the walls, wrapping around her like invisible threads. She wanted to get up and investigate, but something held her back. Some instinct that warned her certain knowledge came with a price. As the days passed, Amma began to notice other strange things about a Kojua memorial. The library had books in languages she didn't recognize, with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The garden behind the school was filled with plants she'd never seen before, despite growing up in the same region. Some of the flowers only bloomed at night, releasing fragrances that made her dream vivid, unsettling dreams. And then there were the lessons themselves. Along with the standard curriculum of mathematics, science, and literature, there were other classes that weren't listed in any official schedule. Cultural heritage, they called it. Traditional wisdom, ancient studies, These classes were taught by the oldest teachers, women whose ages seemed impossible to determine. They spoke of things that made Amma's grandmother's folktales seem like simple children's stories. They talked about the power that runs in women's blood, the responsibility that comes with certain gifts, the price of knowledge that has been passed down through generations. But most disturbing of all was the realization that came to Amma in her 3rd week at the school. She had been trying to count how many girls attended a Kojua memorial, but the number never seemed to stay the same. Sometimes she would see faces in the dining hall that she was sure hadn't been there the day before. Other times, girls she remembered clearly seemed to have vanished without explanation. When she asked Efua about this, her roommate's response was more unsettling than reassuring. "Some girls are ready to learn what this place teaches," Efua said. "Others need more time. And some—" She paused, staring out the small window of their room. "Some are called to serve in different ways." It was then that Amma began to understand that a Kojua memorial wasn't just a school. It was something else entirely, something that had been disguised as an educational institution to hide its true purpose. But what that purpose was, she was only beginning to discover. And as she would soon learn, some knowledge, once gained, can never be forgotten. Some paths, once walked, can never be retraced. And some transformations are irreversible. The question that would haunt her dreams wasn't whether she would graduate from a Kojua memorial. The question was what she would become in the process, and whether, when the time came to leave, she would still remember who she had been before those iron gates closed behind her. Because at a Kojua memorial boarding school for girls, graduation wasn't just about completing your education. It was about completing your transformation into something the world desperately needed. Something ancient and powerful and necessary. Something that most people weren't ready to understand. But first, Amma would have to survive the process of becoming it. It was during her 4th week at a Kojua memorial that Amma first witnessed the ritual. She had been awakened by the sound of bare feet moving in perfect unison down the hallway outside her room. The floorboards, which creaked loudly during the day, made no sound under the mysterious procession. Efua's bed was empty, the sheets pulled back as if she had left in a hurry, or as if she had been summoned. Amma pressed her ear against the thick wooden door, straining to hear what was happening beyond. The footsteps faded into silence, but then came something else. Singing. The same haunting melody she had heard on her first night, but now it was closer, much closer, coming from somewhere directly below their room. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay in bed, Amma crept to the small window. The courtyard below was bathed in moonlight, so bright it seemed almost artificial. And there, arranged in a perfect circle around an ancient baobab tree she was certain hadn't been there during the day, stood dozens of girls. They were all dressed in white flowing robes instead of their usual uniforms. Their heads were uncovered, hair flowing freely in the night breeze. And they were all singing in a language that predated any textbook Amma had ever studied. At the center of the circle stood Headmistress Osei, but she looked different now. Taller somehow, more regal. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the moonlight, making her appear like a living shadow against the white-robed figures surrounding her. In her hands, she held something that glinted in the ethereal light. Amma squinted, trying to make out what it was. A staff! No, not a staff. A scepter carved from what looked like black ivory, topped with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner fire. The headmistress raised the scepter high above her head, and the singing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was so complete that Amma could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then Headmistress Osei began to speak. Her voice carried clearly through the night air, but the words she spoke were not in English, not in Chui, not in any language Amma recognized. Yet somehow, impossibly, she understood every word. Sisters of the Ancient Covenant, the headmistress intoned. "Tonight we welcome new blood into our circle. Tonight we continue the work that has sustained our people for 1,000 years. Tonight we strengthen the barrier that protects what must not be forgotten." Alma watched in fascination and growing terror as 3 girls stepped forward from the circle. She recognized them immediately. Efua was among them, along with 2 other students from her dormitory floor. Girls who had been at the school for exactly 2 years. Girls who were ready for graduation. But this wasn't the kind of graduation ceremony described in any school brochure. The headmistress approached each girl in turn, placing her hands on their foreheads. As she did, each girl began to glow with a soft, otherworldly light. Not the harsh brightness of electric bulbs, but something warm and golden. Something that seemed to come from within. Alma rubbed her eyes, certain she must be dreaming. But when she looked again, the scene was still there. Still impossibly real. "You have learned well," Headmistress Osei said to the 3 girls. "You understand now why this school exists. Why some knowledge can only be passed from woman to woman. Why the old ways must be preserved, even if the world outside has forgotten their value." Efua stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same ancient authority as the headmistress. "We accept the responsibility," she said. "We will carry the light forward. We will guard the secrets that keep the darkness at bay." The other girls in the circle began to move, creating a complex pattern around the 3 initiates. Their white robes flowed like liquid moonlight, and Alma realized they weren't walking. They were floating, actually floating inches above the ground. The singing resumed, but now it was different. More powerful, more urgent. The very air seemed to vibrate with energy, and the baobab tree at the center of the circle began to shimmer. Its trunk became translucent, revealing something hidden. Within, something that made Alma's breath catch in her throat. Inside the tree, suspended in what looked like liquid light, were dozens of objects. Ancient artifacts, scrolls written in languages lost to time, jewelry that pulsed with inner fire, masks carved from materials that didn't exist in any geology textbook, and books. So many books that their combined knowledge could have filled libraries. This was why girls came to a Kojua memorial. This was why no one was allowed to leave until graduation. This wasn't a school at all. It was a repository, a vault for humanity's most dangerous and precious secrets. And the girls weren't students. They were guardians in training, keepers of wisdom so powerful that it could reshape the world or destroy it. The ceremony continued until dawn began to creep across the horizon. As the first rays of sunlight touched the courtyard, the white-robed figures began to fade like morning mist. The baobab tree solidified again, looking perfectly ordinary, and the 3 girls who had been initiated simply vanished. Alma blinked, and suddenly she was back in her bed, covers pulled up to her chin. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the strange atmosphere of this place? But when she looked across the room, Efua's bed was still empty, and it would remain empty for the next 3 days. When Efua finally returned, she was different. The sadness in her eyes had been replaced by something else. Purpose, ancient wisdom, a kind of knowing that made her seem decades older despite her youthful face. "Where were you?" Alma whispered when they were finally alone. Efua looked at her with those newly awakened eyes and smiled. "Learning what I needed to learn," she said simply. "Becoming who I was meant to become." "And you, sister?" The word sister sent chills down Alma's spine. "What do you mean? You watched, didn't you?" Efua's voice was gentle but knowing. "You saw the ceremony." Alma's mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about." Efua laughed, but it wasn't the laugh of a teenage girl anymore. It was the laugh of someone much older, someone who had seen wonders and terrors beyond imagination. "The calling doesn't come to everyone," Efua explained. Most girls who attend this school receive an excellent education and go on to live normal, successful lives. They remember their time here fondly but vaguely, like a pleasant dream. But some of us, she paused, studying Amma's face intently. Some of us are chosen for something more. The blood remembers, even when the mind tries to forget. What blood? Amma asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The blood of the daughters of Ya Santua, Efua said. The blood of Nzinga of Ndongo. The blood of all the warrior queens and wise women who fought to protect their people's knowledge when the colonizers tried to steal or destroy it. Amma's grandmother had told her stories of these legendary women, but she had always thought they were just that, stories. You carry their legacy, Efua continued. Their power flows in your veins. That's why you could see the ceremony. That's why you understood the ancient words. That's why you're really here. The next few weeks passed in a blur of increasingly strange lessons. In cultural heritage class, Amma learned about the network of guardian schools scattered across Africa, each one dedicated to preserving different aspects of the continent's mystical knowledge. Some focused on healing arts, others on protective magic, still others on the ability to communicate with ancestors. A Kojua memorial specialized in what the teachers called the preservation of memory, the ability to store vast amounts of knowledge in human consciousness and pass it down through generations. In traditional wisdom, she discovered that many of the world's greatest African leaders had been graduates of these hidden schools. They carried within them not just education, but actual mystical abilities that helped them guide their people through times of crisis. In ancient studies, she learned about the great libraries of Timbuktu and Alexandria, how their knowledge hadn't been destroyed as history claimed, but had been hidden, transferred to living repositories, women who became walking libraries, carrying thousands of years of accumulated wisdom in their minds and hearts. But the most disturbing revelation came during a lesson on school history. Amma discovered that a Kojua memorial had been operating in secret for much longer than its official founding date suggested. The colonial-era buildings were just the latest incarnation of a tradition that stretched back centuries. Long before Europeans arrived in Ghana, wise women had been gathering young girls with the gift, training them, preparing them to carry forward the sacred knowledge. The British missionary Margaret Okojua Thompson hadn't founded the school. She had been recruited by it, chosen specifically because her marriage to a local chief gave her the perfect cover for continuing ancient practices under the guise of Christian education. And she had paid the ultimate price for her involvement. Like all the headmistresses before her, Margaret had never left the school grounds after accepting her role. She had literally given her life to the cause of preservation. Her body might have died decades ago, but her spirit remained, bound to the school by oaths older than written history. This was the true meaning of graduation from a Kojua memorial. It wasn't just about completing your education. It was about choosing your fate. Some girls would leave, their memories carefully modified to remember only the academic aspects of their time there. They would go on to successful careers, carrying within them a subtle influence that would guide them to make decisions that benefited Africa and its people. But others would stay, not in body, necessarily, but in spirit. They would become part of the eternal network of guardians. Their consciousness would merge with the collective knowledge stored within the school's mystical infrastructure. They would become living books in a library that existed outside normal space and time. And as Amma learned more about her true purpose at a Kojua memorial, she began to understand the weight of the choice that lay ahead of her. A choice that would determine not just her own future, but the future of countless generations yet to come. Because the knowledge stored within these walls wasn't just historical. It was prophetic. The guardians didn't just preserve the past. They protected the future. And something was coming. Something that would require every ounce of wisdom and power that the guardian schools had accumulated over the centuries. Something that would test whether the ancient ways were strong enough to survive in the modern world. Alma was about to discover that her enrollment at a Kojua Memorial hadn't been her mother's decision at all. It had been destiny, a destiny that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. A destiny that connected her to power she never knew she possessed, and to a battle she never knew was being fought. The revelation of Alma's true destiny came on a night when the moon was dark, and the ancient baobab tree pulsed with restless energy. She had been at a Kojua Memorial for exactly 3 months when Headmistress Osei summoned her to the forbidden wing of the school. The wing that existed on no architectural plans. The wing that students whispered about, but never dared to explore. As Alma followed the headmistress through corridors that seemed to bend reality itself, she felt the weight of generations pressing down upon her. "Your grandmother knew this day would come," Headmistress Osei said, her voice echoing strangely in the impossible hallways. "She was one of us, you know, a guardian who chose to live in the outside world to prepare the next generation." Alma's heart skipped a beat. Her grandmother, with her endless folk tales and mysterious knowledge of herbs and healing. Her grandmother, who always seemed to know things before they happened. Her grandmother, who had died just months before Alma's enrollment at the school. "She left you something," the headmistress continued, stopping before a door made of wood so old it seemed to predate human civilization. Inside the room was a single object. A necklace of amber beads, each one containing what looked like trapped starlight. But Alma recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her grandmother, though she had never seen it glow with such inner fire. "The Ashanti called it Niam's memory," Headmistress Osei explained. "The memory of God himself, passed down through the bloodline of the chosen. Your bloodline." As Alma lifted the necklace, visions flooded her mind. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, standing in this very room, making the same choice that now lay before her. She saw the network of guardian schools across the continent, connected by invisible threads of power and purpose. She saw the coming darkness that the guardians had been preparing to face for decades, a force that sought to erase not just African culture, but the mystical knowledge that kept the world's spiritual balance intact. "The time of preparation is ending," Headmistress Osei said softly. "The enemy we have trained to resist is almost ready to make its move. We need every guardian we can awaken, every drop of ancient power we can channel. But the choice must be yours alone." Alma closed her eyes and felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a mantle passed down through countless generations. She thought of her mother, who would never understand why her daughter had to disappear into legend. She thought of the life she would never live, the normal dreams she would have to sacrifice. But then she thought of Efua, transformed and purposeful. She thought of all the girls who had walked this path before her. She thought of the wisdom that would die if there was no one left to carry it forward. When she opened her eyes, they held the same ancient knowing that marked all the guardians. "I accept," she said simply. The moment the words left her lips, the amber necklace blazed with light so bright it seemed to ignite her very soul. Power flowed through her like liquid fire, connecting her to every guardian who had ever lived. She felt their memories becoming her memories, their strength becoming her strength, their eternal purpose becoming her eternal purpose. As the transformation completed itself, Alma understood that she hadn't lost her old life. She had gained something infinitely more precious. She had become part of a sisterhood that transcended death itself, a living repository of humanity's most sacred truths. Years later, when new girls arrived at a Kojua Memorial, they would sometimes catch glimpses of a figure moving through the shadows of the school. A young woman whose eyes held the wisdom of ages. A guardian who walked between worlds, protecting knowledge too powerful for the uninitiated to comprehend. They would hear stories of the girl who had chosen duty over freedom, purpose over comfort, immortality over a simple human life. And some of them, the ones whose blood carried the ancient calling, would understand that they too faced the same choice, the same glorious, terrible responsibility, the same opportunity to become something more than human, something necessary, something eternal. At Akojua Memorial Boarding School for Girls, graduation was never just about education. It was about transformation. It was about preserving the light in an increasingly dark world. And it was about ensuring that the wisdom of Africa's daughters would never truly die, as long as there were guardians willing to carry it forward, as long as there were young women brave enough to answer the call, as long as there were hearts willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of something greater than themselves. The iron gates of Akojua Memorial might keep students from leaving, but they also kept something far more precious safely within: the living memory of a people, the eternal flame of ancient wisdom, and the promise that no matter how dark the world became, there would always be guardians standing watch, always be protectors keeping the light alive, always be daughters of Africa ready to pay the ultimate price for the sake of generations yet unborn. This is the true story of Akojua Memorial Boarding School for Girls, where no one leaves until they're ready, and some never leave at all, because some destinies are worth more than individual dreams. Some responsibilities transcend personal desires, and some sacrifices echo through eternity.